Right. For those of you who have just joined us, welcome. My name is Jason Owen-Smith. I'm the Executive Director of the Institute for Research on Innovation and Science, IRIS. I'm going to be presenting the webinar today, which is designed to highlight a new data product that IRIS has produced and is sharing with its member universities. We call it the Impact Finder. The goal of the Impact Finder is to allow people who don't necessarily have or want to use for this purpose the technical skills necessary to mine large-scale data in order to be able to discover leads for stories about the impact of their research, with a particular focus right now on the near-term economic impact. So what I'm going to be doing is walking through first a PowerPoint, a very brief one, to give you a sense of our use case of the set of stories and process that led to them, which became instantiated in this work. I'm then going to give you a brief demo and show you how we came to these kinds of discussions using the Impact Finder, and then we'll circle back for some Q&A and other discussion. I want to thank everybody for joining us, and I would like to ask that if you continue as we go along and have questions, that you put them in chat, and we'll be monitoring that. Toward the end, if there are not too many, we may have a queue for people to speak up, but depending on how many folks have questions, it might be easier to go through chat the whole time. So that brings us to the beginning. The first question, for those of you who are not current participants in IRIS, is what is IRIS? And the brief answer is that IRIS is an IRB-approved data repository at the University of Michigan. As a data repository, we are the anchor for a consortium of right now about 35 big research universities in the US, who together account for a little bit more than 40% of all academic R&D spending, and who represent a significant group of research-intensive institutions. Those organizations are member institutions, share data with IRIS. The data that are shared are transaction-level information drawn from sponsored projects, procurement, and human resources data that allow us to see at a unique level of detail how money is being spent from multiple sources to support research. That includes information about each of the people who's paid on a grant, information about purchases of goods and services from vendors, and information about subawardees and the awards themselves. This is a unique source of data, and we'll show you how we mobilize it. But generally speaking, that data flows to us under a set of MOUs. We clean it, integrate it, link it to a variety of other data sources, including scientific outcomes data, data from consortia, and data from the public, and data from proprietary sources. 4 times a year, we send it to our partners at the US Census Bureau, where linkages are made to restricted federal data sets. That data and the data we construct locally feed a series of reports that return to our member universities and that are also reported in the aggregate. And then as part of our data repository work and as our research work, we de-identify the data and make it available for research users through a secure virtual enclave that we maintain here at the Institute for Social Research at the University of Michigan, and through the Federal Statistical Research Data Center system, which is a system of physical data enclaves maintained by the Census Bureau and is required to be used for data that and analyses that touch data owned by the census. So far, more than 100 researchers from around the country are using these data, and we'll talk a little bit more about why. But the whole goal of IRIS, this entire machine you see, is to create and protect and sustain data for research and reporting that'll allow us to better understand, explain, and hopefully improve the public value of research. the ways in which our work contributes to the health, wealth, and well-being of society. So how does that work? Well, we produce a number of reports, and what I'm going to show you is just one of what I believe are right now 9 different data products that come to our member institutions as a portion of this. What we're going to do is talk through one of the strategies that our university, the University of Michigan, used to develop these data. They were interested in doing some communications and outreach aimed at the state legislature and the public on the west side of the state in a block of 3 or 4 counties that we'll talk about in a second. And they were looking for stories of research impact that would line up the contents, the character of scientific findings and research done here and its implications with some of the economic effects. They asked us to be involved. We went to our data set, which at the time required a lot of SQL coding and plowing through many, many rows of data. We've solved that problem for you, as you'll see in a moment. And we produced, between that data and some judicious Googling, which is a theme throughout this, a set of 3 or 4 leads for our communications team to develop into a story. The communications group picked one of them that seemed to suit their needs best and then did a full-scale round of reporting that led to both a print media and a video outcome. The video is actually part of a public service announcement in the bowl game that Michigan was a part of last year. I believe it was the Fiesta Bowl. And collectively, the work that came out of this got millions of impressions as tracked by the University of Michigan. So what I'm going to do first is tell you that story and then give you the demo and let you see how we can use the new IRIS Impact Finder to get that kind of information. For those of you who are representatives of IRIS member universities, these data are available in the Impact Finder in your IRIS web portal, and we're happy to follow up with more specific questions about your data or its use. But the story. In the early to mid 1990s, a group of researchers led by Dale and Beverly Ehrlich made headlines by publishing a bunch of research, including this article, that demonstrated that just a few minutes a day of training on a special treadmill aided infants with developmental disabilities, such as Down syndrome, cerebral palsy, and others, with developing the motor coordination they needed to walk faster. Now, this is a big deal because particularly for children with Down syndrome, the onset of walking tends to happen, 12 to 18 months later than for a child who isn't suffering from this developmental disease. And as a result, being able to demonstrate that treadmill training could speed that up by 6 months had a real and serious clinical implication. The Michigan Press Office at the time published an article about this article, a press release and a series of things which publicized this, talked about the findings, and noted the area in the red box that the treadmills cost about $1,200 each, and Ulrich, the PI, says the hope is that more hospitals and parent organizations will rent the equipment to parents. So the idea is that in addition to a scientific finding, there's a story here about a piece of research equipment that could become an important intervention. But no one at this point was asking, hey, where'd those treadmills come from? That's what we started to look at. We dug through a bunch of vendor payments focused on particular agencies and particular geography, part of the state, looking for instances where a Michigan research organization had bought goods and services from a vendor in that state. In particular, we were interested in smaller businesses, entrepreneurial businesses, independent businesses. We identified a series of charges to what turned out to be the Ulrich's lab from the university, mostly funded by NIH and the Institute of Education Sciences, IES, to a small business in Sturgis, Michigan called Carlin's Creations. This is their website. What we were able to do with the data that IRIS maintains and some of the linkages that it does is to identify and pull out the PI, the funder, the name of the organization, a website, some basic information, as well as some information derived from the abstracts of the relevant grants that purchased these goods. What we were able to do is use that to generate a paragraph or two lead we handed off for reporting. The result of that, there's a picture of Sturgis. The result of that was this story. Right? Sam Carlin has built 50 pediatric treadmills for researchers. Right? The custom exercise equipment helped Professor Dale Ulrich, this is him, do his research. Treadmill training helps reduce the significant delay to walking. Here's a picture of the PI on a treadmill built by Carlin's Creations with a super cute infant getting their exercise. So this is a way to put together, if you will, the scientific impact and some of the economic impact, and the sense that the work of universities like ours and like many of yours involves in essential ways people who are outside the boundaries of the university, and working with the institution can aid them. Carlin's Creations, as we'll see in a second, actually actively advertises as a result of this work with the University of Michigan, and is an important provider of these treadmills to families, and especially now to hospitals, which have begun renting them out to new parents. So this is the story. The university also produced a brief video that, as I said, got folded into their public service announcement in a big national platform. It's a 2-minute video that I'm going to play for you just to give you a sense of how this worked, and then I'm going to shift over to demoing how the Impact Finder allows you to do this kind of work.
That's very consistent in the Down syndrome population, that the average age of onset of walking is somewhere between 24 months and 28 months, roughly.
We hadn't heard of treadmill intervention before. It was all new to us. And so we visited the University of Michigan's kinesiology department to understand exactly what it was that they did help with Down syndrome walk earlier.
It's definitely successful. I think it also gives parents something that they can be invested in and do with their child, feel like they're helping them. And absolutely, it's beneficial.
Once a child learns to walk, they get to explore their environment. They learn from the environment. They develop cognitive skills, they develop language skills, they develop emotional skills. And so walking is a facilitator of many other critical skills that the child needs across many domains.
We're just lucky that the University of Michigan is nearby and doing such tremendous research to help people with disabilities. I think that our son was blessed to be a participant in the program, and he's a recipient of such tremendous work, and it's impacted his life.
So with that, you've seen sort of the full scope and some of the backstory. In order to get the Impact Finder, which I'm just about to stop sharing the PowerPoint and show you a quick demo of, We worked back and forth with our development team and our data team and with representatives, particularly from communications and government relations at a number of our member universities. So I'm going to pause and stop sharing this screen and then start another quick one. Great. What you're seeing here is the administrative of the IRIS data portal. This is the place where universities submit data to IRIS and also where we serve back the reports and other products. And you can get a sense just by looking at this of what the range of activity and reporting is. I'm only going to show you one of these things today, but we'll end with some information for those of you current IRIS members. If you wish to reach out and ask questions about membership or these products, very happy to talk with you more about them. What we're going to do is look first at the Impact Finder. This is the front page of the Impact Finder for the University of Michigan. I have Michigan's approval to share data like this for the purposes of doing these kinds of webinars, but typically we would not share any information about a single university without that university's permission with the public or with other institutions. What this allows you to do is select a state. So you could click on Michigan and see it. In order to avoid any loading problems, just going to show you what I've already done. The result of clicking the state gives you this screen, which allows you to select a year range of data, whether you want to see all grants or only those for which we've been able to link abstracts, whether you want all contracts or to separate out vendors and subawards. It allows you to search by specific counties, to narrow your search to specific funding agencies, and there's search functionality that we're working to develop. And what you see in this case, when you search for all vendors from the University of Michigan for fiscal 2018 and 2019, you get a map that is interactive and that shows you the geographic location of the University of Michigan vendors in this state. As you zoom in and scroll around, you can actually see for individuals what these payments are. And on the right-hand side, you can see the list of organizations themselves. So this is the logic behind how we found the leads for this presentation. You can take a look, for instance, here's a case of a company called Essen Biosciences that's located in Washtenaw County. For those of you who don't know, that's the home of the University of Michigan. They've sold about $40,000 worth of goods and services to Michigan research projects over this time. And what we see here are information about the grants that paid them. So the award number, and when you view details, information about the payment, the funder, the proposal number for when a university may want to link into its own proposal system to think about doing this, information about the PI drawn from public data released by NIH, and the abstract. Together, this plus the name of the business gives you a pretty good sense of where to start in digging up the leads to hand off to your communications folks or to develop as a communications professional. So when we got our example and our request from the University of Michigan's communication office, what we did conceptually that we now see being able to do here is limit our search by geography to focus in solely on the part of the state that the university wanted to target. What I'll show you here is one that I've already loaded, but it gives you a sense. Here with the same thing, what we've done is selected a set of 5 counties. They're basically the southwest corner of the state. We've limited, not at this point, to funding agencies, though if you wanted to, you could, and we have federal agencies and other sources of funding that you can select from. And we've left the time frame open over the course of the data, in part because we didn't have a time barrier and we wanted to start digging. So when you apply these filters, the result is 166 vendor establishments in this section of the state. And you can get a sense, this is Kalamazoo, which is the largest city in that portion of the state. You can get a sense of where these organizations are concentrated, and on this side, what they do. And so if you move in, you can scroll around, or you can proceed through these and get a sense of what's going on. Here again, payment to a library, additional vendor establishments here. There's Carlin's Creations. Right, and you see the same thing over here. So what we initially did was just look at the titles of the grants, though now you have the abstract numbers. Here's an R01 payment from the National Institute of Health for sensory motor development in infants born with spina bifida. This isn't the Down syndrome case that we described, but it gives you a sense that these vendor purchases support a type of research that's oriented toward interventions for infants with developmental disorders. Between this and the name of the business, you can do a little Googling and find out where the business is, who the PI is, what the organization has done. And you'll notice that this includes payment from a variety of different grants, some of which have abstracts associated with them, some of which do not. At this point, we don't have abstract information for non-federal funders, and it's strongest for NIH and NSF, but you can still see a good bit of interesting information, even if you look at one of those. So in this case, treadmill training for infants with Down syndrome from a nonprofit foundation with an award title and award number. This isn't something that we could figure out, but certainly if an organization such as a university wanted to do it, this information can be derived from proposal management and other systems. So that's the idea, that we've tried to create here a very interactive, very flexible system to allow particularly communications and government relations professionals at universities to link up and develop leads for stories of research impact that bridge the scientific impact and the local or national economic impact, and that allow you to target your searches by time, geography, and funding source. And it's that we think is the potentially interesting value here, and a potentially really interesting model for developing these kinds of stories in the near term, particularly as regard to the economic development efforts that many universities are working on right now. I'm going to stop sharing and move back to the PowerPoint before I pause for Q&A and discussion. So just a reminder, the impact finder. I lost my screen sharing, it appears. Let's try that again. There we go. Just a reminder of the impact finder itself, right here. And then very briefly, for those of you who are not already IRIS members, joining IRIS comes with a bunch of benefits. There's a bunch of reports. The impact finder is one of them. Some of those reports allow for benchmarking against aggregates. Your affiliated researchers get free access to the data we build. We're governed by a board of directors elected by and nominated by IRIS members, so strong role in governance and the ability to participate in a variety of efforts to do what we've done here with our partner universities, which is to develop new products to address particular needs in order to help universities understand, explain, and improve what they do. We also do a lot of work to translate research into this. The cost of
Jason, if I could interrupt you just for a moment, we have a couple of questions that if you could just briefly pause. From one participant asked what the word vendor means, and Dan did provide a response in the chat, but you might want to touch on that. And then Baron Wolf from University of Kentucky asked if we had demographic data on who the vendors are, specifically minority owned, woman owned, and so forth.
Okay, great. Thanks very much. And yes, I think we're perfectly happy to switch over to Q&A here. And we're happy to circulate the link to the organization to the video that I just played in case there were some lags. This report does not include information about demographics of vendors. Another report that we produce, which is we call the vendor report, links data from each university to proprietary information maintained by a company named Bureau van Dijk. This is what's called the Orbis dataset, which many of your institutions' libraries probably subscribe to. And what that allows us to do is identify ownership structure and flags for organization size and for minority and women-owned status. We also do an additional set of work to link these data to restricted census data products, which, because they are working under privacy restrictions, allow us to produce less granular data, but those data provide some insight into how many people in what industries are employed by vendors and other organizations. And when we say vendor here, we're distinguishing between vendors and subawardees. So vendors are any organization that you purchase a good or a service from. Some of those are nonprofits. In fact, when you're looking at research in social work or in public health, you often see payments to local churches and libraries and other things who help with subject pool development or aid in other things. Subawardees are other research performing institutions that you pass a contract through. So when we say vendors, we don't just mean corporations or businesses. We mean every organization that contributes by virtue of being a supplier to an individual research project to the work of the university. And then the other questions we have, I think, who provided the award data, project award data? The brief answer is it was provided by each individual member university. Universities that join IRIS are agreeing to submit to IRIS, and we can make available the data dictionary and other information, which is also available on our website, which you see here. But they pull these administrative data from their data stacks, essentially from the data warehouse that most universities maintain, and submit them to us through the website. We then do a lot of work to clean and integrate those data and make linkages. For instance, the impact finder required that we transform data on the addresses of organizations that were vendors or subawardees to latitudes and longitudes, which would allow us to position them on the map. Universities don't submit award data for the particular, universities don't submit award data that includes abstracts, but we link data using award numbers to publicly release data sets by funders, for instance, NIH Exporter and Federal Reporter, which allow us to draw information such as the abstracts. And then the next question I saw was, do member institutions have a single master login, or can individual units and researchers access and use the tool? Individuals can access and use the tool. If I jump back to the portal here, this is what the IRIS portal looks like. This is what the dashboard of a particular university looks like. Each university has a point of contact, what we call a data contact, who's responsible for working with our technical staff and technical director, Kevin Bjorn, to get the data uploaded and installed. That person has the ability to create individual passwords for the logins and passwords for staff members at the university. We don't then see the passwords, we see a hash of them, and this was our effort to keep this very strongly in the hands of our member institutions. So this is what they'd see. In this case, you'd click on the impact finder. And then here, for other purposes, this is a version of this made with synthetic data, which we can share a link to if you all are interested. I'll go back to chat to see if there are other questions. What kinds of reports generated by member universities from the data? There are a set of them. So far, what we have, the Impact Finder is our newest report. We produce what we call a spending report, which breaks out employment on grants and overall vendor spending by county and congressional district and by funding agency. So it gives you a sense of what the scientific workforce on campus is, and also includes a bunch of benchmarking against aggregate attributes. We have what we call the vendor report, which I just described to you. A series of smaller, more focused reports aimed at government relations, which summarize and present data at the state congressional or Senate district level and at the federal congressional district level that are usually used for government relations. 2 reports drawn from linked census data, one of which shows outcomes in terms of careers for individuals who were paid on grants, with a focus particularly on where in the nation graduate students and postdocs are working, what sectors, and how much they're making, drawn from tax data and unemployment insurance data maintained by the census. And also a report that highlights pieces of the economic impact of vendor spending by focusing on the size, employees, and average wage of the vendors. Finally, we have what we call the CTSA report, which is a special report that we developed again in collaboration with 10 of our member universities to look at the educational and career development impact of what are called clinical translational science awards. We do a lot of continued development, and the goal of all of these is to augment the university's data in a way that makes it valuable and accessible and protectable for research, while still returning things of value to the universities for the purposes of understanding, explaining, and we hope improving both the visibility and the public value of the academic research mission. All right. I see that Dan has sent out a link here to examples of our reports and products. Those are available on the website. I also wanted to show you all this, and for those of you who are working with these as we sit here, I wondered if there were other questions specific to the Impact Finder or to the story and process we've described. Can you identify vendors showing up in the Impact Finder that are MWBE entities, or can you search for vendors in hub zones or economic development areas? This from Mike Holland. Not yet, though it is possible to add additional geographies and to look for these organizations. Part of what we're doing now is working on the wish list that develops out of initial user testing of this product and uses, so that we can figure out what to add to the search bars and filtering that would make this more valuable. And so one of the things we've thought hard about is economic development areas, and also thinking about how this aligns with the move of lots of our member universities, at least the public institutions, to align themselves with the IEP program at APLU. And then another question, beyond the report products, is there the ability to configure special reports or export data sets for other analyses? The micro data that we produce is not exportable unless it is the member institution's data. We can do anything with your data that you allow us to do, and we routinely share back more cleaned micro data, and also where it's possible under our various contracts, the extensions of that data. So for instance, latitudes and longitudes or congressional district information. However, it is not at this point easily possible, in fact, not possible at all, for representatives of one university to get access to the detailed data of another university unless they are going through our research platform, which requires assigned DUA and IRB approvals. We do however, make the data in each of our reports that underlies each figure available for download, and many organizations download, reformat, and brand that to make their points more clear. We also have functionality that is not in the Impact Finder because it's a thoroughly interactive report, but is in our other reports that allows you to configure what would be seen and then to share a time-limited link with people who would use it. So we've done a lot to try to bring this out in the service, ideally, of helping our member institutions and organizations that span many of our member institutions, such as AAU or APLU, to use these data systematically and clearly to do this kind of work, both outreach and research.